As Congress negotiates over a new stimulus bill, some promising signs that the coronavirus is at least slowing down in the hardest hit states. Major League Baseball's shortened season already in jeopardy as numerous players test positive. And are we just going to be working from home forever? Google telling workers to plan on it at least until next summer. Here's what you need to know. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need2Know podcast for Tuesday, July 28th. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hi, Carlo. Good morning.
Jill, good morning. Good to see you back at home. How was the office yesterday?
The office was good. It was hot.
What's going on in Manhattan these days? I haven't been in Manhattan in so long, but this is like the worst time of the year. Hot,
Yeah,
miserable.
it feels like you know what, right? This is when the city's sort of unbearable anyway. It's just
Yeah.
really quiet. I'm the biggest fan of coffee cart coffee, right? I get my
Yeah.
coffee from the
Is
cart
our
down.
guy still there?
Our guy is not there. I've had to find a new guy who is around the corner, who has the French vanilla coffee mate that I've become addicted to. And so
So
he
gross.
I go to him every morning that I'm in the office. So he's become my new go-to guy. And it's just sad. There was this article in the New York Times this past weekend about just what's going to happen to Midtown
Yeah.
Manhattan. And they profiled a hot dog vendor who, at the height of, just the bustle of it all before the pandemic, he was selling 400 hot dogs a day. He now sells 10, if that.
Yeah. No, I mean, we're going to talk about something on that note a little later in the pod. It is it's really worrisome. A lot of those guys, especially, like what's going to happen to them.
Yeah, but the city felt really just quiet, empty, and just hot all around. But let's get to
Nice.
some news. You're home? You're not at your
I'm in Long
cabin?
Island, but I will be returning to Brooklyn. I will be returning to Brooklyn this evening.
Okay.
So back to reality.
All right. Well, let's get to some news here. Lawmakers in Washington continuing today to negotiate over the scope of the next economic relief package. Republicans opened with a $1 trillion package that would cut the enhanced unemployment benefit from $600 to $200 a week. The Democrats want to keep that benefit intact through the end of the year. Their package is $3 trillion, so 3 times what the Republican package is. So these are the two opening bids. Now they're going to be negotiated. Meanwhile, over at the White House, the National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien tested positive for the virus, becoming the highest ranking official and member of the president's inner circle to contract it. Meanwhile, the death toll is just inching back up. So we're now at about 1,000 deaths a day from this virus, going on about a week. Now, better than where we were at the start of this thing. The worst of it, we had about 2,000 deaths a day in this country, mostly in the Northeast. That's when the pandemic was first hitting us here. So that's a little context. But it's 1,000 deaths a day is incredible in a bad way.
I mean, of course, and again, I mean, not to beat a dead horse here, but it's happening as new cases are starting to level off in these really hard hit states like Texas, Arizona, and Florida, as we mentioned yesterday. So it's a little bit hard to grasp, I guess, if you're not paying close attention. It's like deaths are going up again because they're this lagging indicator, even as cases start to recede a bit. So obviously it's not great news with 1,000 deaths a day is terrible, but we are starting to see this level off in the hardest hit states, which is again good. I do want to mention, Jill, this the story that was in the Atlantic yesterday. The Atlantic, by the way, is they are doing some of the best reporting just on coronavirus, and it's all free. I would highly suggest you add that to your sort of like news mix if you haven't already. They haven't put any of their coronavirus coverage behind the paywall, and they're really doing some of the most, I think, remarkable just sort of reporting about some of the stuff that we talk about every day, but really in depth. But they did a story yesterday on this issue of what they're calling hygiene theater. Right, which I think is something that we've actually talked about a little bit. But I read this piece and I was like, finally, somebody put this into writing. What I've been sort of like thinking in my head, and it's just this idea that all of these places, businesses and schools and airports and airplanes and trains, they're coming out and they're saying, come on in, like, we're good because we're disinfecting everything all the time now, right? We're wiping everything down after everybody uses it, and it's just this article is sort of about how that's kind of not relevant, right? We now know that pretty much everybody who's getting this virus is getting it because they're talking or having face-to-face communication with somebody who has it. It's coming through these respiratory droplets. Like, we pretty much know that it happens. It's much more easy to happen inside. It can happen outside, but that's how it's happening. It's not really happening because you touched a door handle. And somebody had it. Now, that's not to say that that can't happen, but that's just not really how it's happening. And we're spending a lot of money to disinfect these surfaces as a way to sort of make ourselves feel better. For example, the MTA in New York, they're spending something like $150 million to disinfect the subways at night, when we know that that's not really doing anything, because it's not going to, if the subway seat that you're sitting in is clean, like, okay, that's nice, I guess. But if there's a guy next to you, who doesn't have his mask on and he's coughing up a storm, like, it's not going to help you there, right? So anyway, I would recommend this story. It's sort of analogous to what happened after 9/11 with sort of like the security theater at the airports, right? We decided that the way that we're going to keep ourselves safe was to sort of like pat everybody's grandma down and and ban bottled water, right? It's kind of like missing the point, I think.
Yeah, and it's always reactive. It's never preactive. It's like they stop someone who was trying to do something with a
Sure.
liquid, and now no one could have liquid like that. Well, if
Right,
he got
exactly.
through, you probably we would have been in trouble. So I
You
read
still have
that
to take your
article.
shoes off because of that one guy back in 2001 who tried to take that plane down. Anyway, go ahead. Well, that's a whole another thing we could talk about.
You sent that article to me last night, and I did read it, and I thank you for it. My big takeaway was that doing all of this extra hygiene, aka hygiene theater, not only is it unnecessary when it comes to stopping the spread of the virus, but it's actually harmful, and that's because a lot of people then have this false sense of security. And also they say that people just have a capacity for doing only so much. So, for example, if you're going
Right,
food
exactly.
shopping and you're wiping down your cart. Then you come home and you wipe down every piece of food. You leave it in the garage for 2 days, which was literally our food shopping plan back in March and
Sure.
April. Um, then you might be less likely to do something that's actually effective. For example, wear a mask or just avoid certain places. So
No, that's
the
definitely the
fact that we're
takeaway.
doing this
Yeah.
and it's actually harmful, it's just another thing I guess we're getting wrong as a
Well, it's
country
just a bit,
here.
and it's just amazing to think about how. I mean, because I'm not blaming anybody. I mean, it's a sort of it's a natural reaction to have, right? And it's just amazing how much we've learned just in those last few months. Because yeah, I mean, back in February and March, it was all about I was wearing gloves everywhere. I was like super careful not to touch my face, which I still you should be careful about doing, obviously. But washing your hands like 15 times a day. And actually, one of the points in this article was you should continue to wash your hands as much as possible, just because it can never hurt. There's a really low barrier, and it's just better to do that. But it was more about these sort of like big expenditures of disinfecting airplane seats, that is really not doing us any good.
And the headline or a subtitle was like, "You could stop wiping down your mail." And I think that was one of those that I was doing that, where we were leaving the mail in the mailbox for 2 days before we actually got it. So, okay, so back to this one and only question that's on the mind of parents. What is happening with school? A number of studies in countries like Germany and Denmark suggesting that the safest way to bring students and teachers back to school depends on a number of variables, including the age of the students. Older students appear to transmit the virus much easier than younger students. One study in South Korea found that kids under the age of 10 had the lowest transmission rate of any group, actually.
Yeah, and meanwhile, kids from 10 to 19 in that same study, they found that they're transmitting the virus basically as though adults would. So what does that suggest, right? It suggests that K through 5, really elementary school, I guess, it would might be have a much easier time coming back if if they put some of these protocols in place, some of the social distancing protocols, at least to the best of their ability. When you got 5-year-olds to deal with, but that it may be a lot easier for the lower grades to come back than the upper grades, than sort of high school students. Obviously, these things
Just
depend
wait,
on
quick.
location.
Sorry, I'm just gonna quickly chime in. That's in my district where I grew up. Elementary is going back full time to start, but middle school and high school are not. So perhaps
Oh,
that,
that's interesting.
perhaps
Okay,
they're
yeah.
using some of that info in coming up with their plan.
Yeah, I thought that that was really interesting when I read that, because I guess I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. But again, I think the biggest variable is what's the deal with the outbreak where the school is, right? This is all. It's almost like every single school district needs its own tailored plan. But I do want to draw attention to a story that was in the Washington Post. I think it was Sunday that I read it. This reporter talked to a bunch of parents in the DC Baltimore area. That's sort of like what do they call that? Like Delmarva or the Inner Harbor? I don't know. But anyway, that's sort of metropolis. And a lot of these parents that they talked to said that they were trying to pull their kids out of the public schools and get them enrolled in the private schools, many of which are have these concrete plans to reopen. Some of these parents saying, it's the only thing they can do to ensure that they can go back to work. They just really don't trust the virtual instruction in the public schools. And obviously, these are parents who can afford to do this. But it's an interesting article because it made me think about all of the inequalities that are going to be exacerbated by something like this. And I'm not blaming any parent for doing what they think is in the best interest of their family and their children, of course, right? But just think about parents telling their kids like, oh, your best friend isn't actually going to be in class with you this fall because he's going to the fancy private school, because we can afford to put him there, and we have a better sense that he's going to get somewhat of a real education there this year. Um, Private schools have smaller class sizes. They have bigger campuses. Some of them even have enough money to be able to do like private testing. So they're in much better shape than a lot of the public schools. And it's just, I'm not really explaining it very well, but it was a reminder of just like the knock-on effects of what we're living through, that could just be enormous, and we don't even know yet. We don't know what any of this stuff is going to mean down the road. But it's just, another thing to think about, I guess, right?
Not only are some parents thinking private school, but there's these things called pods now that a lot of parents are talking
I heard
about where
about that. All right.
yeah, they find that where they're going to Facebook and social media to try to find other kids in their area, and kind of say, okay, if school shut down, will five of us, right? Our five families are going to will kind of like we'll be like a quarantine,
Right.
and we'll all follow really strict quarantining and shutdowns and social distancing, and then they'll hire a teacher or a private tutor or somebody to teach those kids, and give them some type of learning environment in person. It's a
Right.
fascinating, and
It is
it
fascinating.
yeah. It's like
But
somebody
it's
said,
just
just leave it to the parents to figure this out, when
right.
schools can't.
No, exactly. And again, I get that, but in the sort of the same way, what about the kids who can't afford to, they can't afford to be a part of a pod because their parents can't pitch in for a private tutor. What's going to happen to them? It's just, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to any of these things. I just think that these are all things that we just have to think about in terms of like these really long-term effects of what they're going to mean for kids, right?
Listen, the economic differences are exacerbated during this pandemic,
Totally.
100%, and that's the point. Whether it's private school, whether it's pods, whether it's just a school district that's more on top of it than a different school district. I mean, I think it's going to be a while until we know the long term effects. But it's all just really tragic right now. Meanwhile, though, overseas, China officially taken back control of the American consulate in Chengdu. So this is a symbolic indication of how far and fast the diplomatic relations between the world's two largest economies have deteriorated. Chinese soldiers took down the US flag outside the mission as crowds of people waving Chinese flags looked on. So this was all in retaliation for the US closing the Chinese mission in Houston last week. Carlo, it's probably the lowest point in relations between China and the US, probably in either of our lifetimes.
I mean, I think so, and I think that this is something we have to continue to watch, Jill. I know you guys covered it last week when I was out, when this sort of went down, but I was watching. Actually, I saw some of the pictures yeah, from Chinese state media yesterday of this, and it was really kind of scary, actually. This normally wouldn't be some huge event, right? They just sort of like our diplomats left that mission as they were told to do, and the Chinese soldiers sort of came in and took it over, but it turned into this huge nationalistic event. Like you said, there were people waving flags, there were people shouting like epithets at Americans, and the state media was really playing it up. So it's just, again, feel like I say it all the time, but it's something worrisome that we have to keep watching. And I don't know, but having no relationship with China right now is, I understand why it's so bad in some ways with tariffs and with the virus, but it's not like China's Russia. They are a major economic player in the world.
On the note of the economy, so we don't often mention precious metals trading on this podcast, but it is worth noting what's
We
happening
should
with gold.
more. We
Yes,
should
we
do a
should.
whole metals podcast.
I'll let you do that one, Carlo,
Yeah.
and you could bring a
Okay.
special guest, and you can just own it.
Talk about silver. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all you. But we should talk about what's happening with gold. The price of gold is now at a record high. It's approaching $2,000 an ounce. Gold is typically thought of as it's called a quote unquote safe haven investment. So this is where you park your money when you're worried about the global economy, and the run up in its price suggests that investors are increasingly nervous about our economic recovery, not just the coronavirus, but the growing tension, as we were just mentioning, between the U.S. and China.
Yeah, I think that is what's happening. There's so many little things happening right now that don't even really make the news because there's just so much news. But I think in another time would really be ringing alarm bells for anyone who's paying attention. And I think Wall Street is starting to pay attention to these things, as evidenced by what you just said, Jill, about what's happening with gold. One example, just quickly, that I read the other day: Neiman Marcus, the big what do you call them? Department store. They just bailed on their store in the Hudson Yards development in Manhattan, right? So again, this is something that you wouldn't think of as being a huge deal, especially if you don't live in New York. Like, who cares, right? Retailers go out of business. They shut down stores all the time. But they were the anchor tenant in this huge commercial real estate development in Manhattan. So they're pulling the plug after being there for just a year. What does that mean for all the other stores in that space, right? You're gonna have a vacancy in the biggest tenant in the whole mall. What does that mean for the smaller guys, right? What does it mean for like, to your point earlier, to the hot dog vendors who depend on the people who are coming to that mall, the tourists who are coming to that mall to shop? If no one's coming back to the office towers in Midtown Manhattan, as you mentioned before, or in Soma in San Francisco, what happens to the shoe guy who depends on the office workers needing their shoes repaired in the middle of the day? There's so many of these downward, economic issues that I feel like aren't really baked in, at least to like the stock market. I don't know how I got there from talking about gold. Maybe I don't. Maybe I'm totally out to lunch today, but I'm
No,
just
I
trying to make this. Go ahead.
I think it's a good point. No, continue.
No, no, that's pretty much it. I don't have an answer. I was just like, there's a lot going on that's really scary, and it feels like the stock market hasn't, or Wall Street hasn't really baked that into the pie yet.
Well, I think we're just seeing that the stock market is a very different thing than the economy, and that's the bottom line. And that when we talk about the stock market being at record highs, that does not mean that the economy is doing well. It just doesn't. We're at really high
Right.
unemployment. People, and so I just think that there's a huge difference between what's going on with a share of Amazon versus what's happening with people being able to pay for their mortgage or their rent. But this is a perfect segue, though, because the big story in Silicon Valley today is what Google just told its employees, which is stay at home through next July, at least. All right, think about that. Google has decided to keep all of its employees remote until next summer, becoming the first major American company to extend that timeline for work from home. out an entire year. This decision is going to affect nearly all of Google parent Alphabet's 200,000 employees from the Bay Area to India. The company says it's making the decision, to try and give its workers as much flexibility as possible when it comes to their living and family arrangements. Basically they're saying, if you were if you're making a decision about where to go, you have kids who have a school year, right? Like you have to make it, people have to have
Yeah.
some sort of understanding of where they're going to be until at least next summer. So I
No, and
appreciate that decision.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, and especially a company like Google, where I think most of their employees probably can work from home pretty easily. I think it makes sense to just say, like, think about it in these longer terms instead of just kicking the can down the road a couple months. But again, to our earlier point, Jill, I mean, who's going to sign a lease for a $3,000 one bedroom in, downtown San Francisco right now, or in Manhattan, right? Not to mention the commercial real estate that I just mentioned. Is Google going to continue to pay rent on the millions of square feet of office space they have around the world for the next year? I don't know the answer to that. Is there a better use for that office space, right? They have these huge campuses. Can we put schools in there? Can we put classes in their, in their office buildings? I mean, probably not, because I doubt that they would want to. But that's just an example of this sort of like out of the box thinking. I think that we need to continue to do.
That's an
But
interesting
yeah,
idea.
yeah. I mean, I don't. Yeah. So Google, are you listening? Sundar Pichai. That's my question to you. All the schools in the Bay Area in your Mountain View campus. But Jill, I mean, I know we've talked about this before, but I actually miss the office. I'm sort of over the whole work from home thing. I get why Google is doing this, and I suspect that because they're doing it, a lot more people are going to follow. And I understand why we're not going back to the office anytime soon. But I got to say, I do miss it. I'm not one of these people that is like, I'm all in on work from home forever.
I agree, and I will tell you, I mean, I have to go in as often as I can, and it is an easier day in the office. Just the ease, and granted, I have a different job than most people, but just the ease of the technology, and it does make it easier. But the office, it's not the office, right? There's no one congregating. Half of
Yeah.
the fun is chit chatting. I will say some of the best ideas, I feel like even that you and I have for this podcast or for the newsletter or for anything else, usually come from us just kind of chatting,
Totally.
in the
Totally.
kitchen or after the show. It's not, and that's the stuff I wonder the ideas. I wonder what's not happening, right? We know that basic work can get done remotely, but are people having these ideas when they go on their coffee breaks that somehow become the next really
Yeah.
great idea for a company?
No, I think that's a great question. That's again something we'll just never know the answer to, right? Like how many startups would have been intubated, or sorry, not intubated, incubated in, in the break room, but didn't, because it's just not easy to do that over Slack and over text, and over Zoom and whatnot. You really have to, like, there's a culture to an office, and that's one of the, if it's a good one, that's really one of the perks of working sort of a 9 to 5 job.
And one of the complaints, according to this article I just read, but from bosses, right, and from managers, is it's harder to instill company values and ethics and things like that when people are working remotely. It's a lot easier to do it face to face in the office.
Sure.
But finally, our last story here. It took Major League Baseball season all of one weekend to find itself in jeopardy after a coronavirus outbreak swept through the Miami Marlins clubhouse. 3 games have been postponed as the league tries to stem the outbreak, which has infected at least 14 members of the Marlins. It's believed to have started in Philadelphia, where the team played over the weekend.
Yeah, this is not surprising. The virus just isn't under control, Jill. They're trying to have this season as though everything's fine, and it's obviously not fine. So I think you either have to do a bubble like the NBA and the NHL are doing, which so far, knock on wood, have been going pretty well, even though the seasons haven't actually started yet, or you have to just pull the plug entirely, which I think is maybe what may end up happening with baseball. These teams are still flying around, they're sleeping in their own beds at night. It's a mess. And I think when you think about it another way, the MLB is a multi-billion-dollar sports league with essentially unlimited resources, and they made it 3 days before an outbreak. what does that mean for an underfunded, inner city school in Brooklyn when they have an outbreak? Like, it's only a matter of time until that happens. And I think this is showing us that. And I think it also shows us, at least it tells me, is there going to be a football season this year? I think that the chances of there being an NFL season the first week of September are getting slimmer by the day. And I hope I'm wrong about that, but I don't know.
And I thought that even with Robert O'Brien, right, the NSA, the head of the NSA, and he's a high-ranking government official, and if he's getting coronavirus, by the way, and only really found out about it probably because he has to go through rigorous
Because they're being
testing. Yeah, that
Yeah,
that
exactly.
regular people aren't doing. It's like, what hope do the rest of us have? And baseball said the other thing is that the Marlins, part of baseball's rules is that if there's an outbreak in the team, there's not really a protocol for what to do. So the team itself decides what they want to do. Do they want to play? Do they not want to play? So the
Yeah.
team players via text message decided that they still wanted to play, even though they knew their previous game, even though they knew that some of the players had the virus. So, I mean, there just needs to be, I don't know the answer, right? I don't know the answer, but it seems like there should be at least
Well,
some
I think
sort of rules and protocols if players start getting the virus.
absolutely, and I think not to belabor it, but I think that the NBA is doing the exact opposite. They have these really insane rules. If you go out, these guys. One player went out to get chicken wings, and he was sent back to quarantine for 10 days. Like I think that's how it has to be if they're going to try and do the bubble. It has to be sort of like no, like you cannot mess up. Like this has to be all or nothing. But that's what they're not doing that, and now they're paying the price, I think.
All right. Enjoy one more day in your bubble, Carlo. And then you are back. I will miss the
To my
birds
other bubble.
chirping.
I know, me too.
Um,
That makes two of us. But we'll
all
get
right.
we'll get
Enjoy the day, everybody.
okay, no, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, enjoy the day. Also, Carlo, why don't you take a recording of the birds, and that way you could just play it in the background, and we'll feel like everything's the way it should be.
Yes, it will drown out the construction noise in Brooklyn.
All right, everybody, have a great day. That's what you need to know for Tuesday, July 28th.
Folks.